My friend's mom smiled at me, and I knew I was hopelessly drawn to her secret. I never thought a single smile could make my chest tighten the way hers did. It happened in the living room, sunlight slanting through the blinds, dust motes dancing lazily in the golden light. She was standing by the window, her fingers resting lightly on the frame, that faint curve of her lips catching the sunlight just so. I don't know why I noticed the small details, the way her hair fell across her shoulder, the subtle scent of jasmine she always carried. But somehow, every part of her seemed designed to pull me in without effort. I was 24, sitting on the edge of the sofa, my hands curled around a mug that was long gone cold, pretending to read the book on my lap. She didn't have to say anything. The quiet between us was already loaded. I could feel it. The unspoken knowledge that this moment wasn't casual, that some invisible thread had pulled tight, connecting us in a way I wasn't ready to name. When she moved closer to pour herself a cup of coffee, our hands brushed, brief, accidental, but my pulse jumped anyway. She didn't pull away, not immediately, just let our fingers linger for a fraction longer than normal. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I was acutely aware of the warmth radiating from her body, of the way the sunlight kissed the soft lines at the corner of her eyes. There was a grace in her presence, the kind that made everything else in the room fade. "You've been quiet today," she said, her voice low, almost teasing. She leaned slightly against the counter, the curve of her hip visible even under the loose blouse she favored. There was a softness in her eyes, a subtle vulnerability beneath the poised confidence she always carried. I wanted to tell her everything I felt, but the words stuck in my throat, tangled in their own hesitation. "Just thinking," I muttered, knowing how absurdly inadequate it sounded. Her smile deepened, the kind that made her whole face light up, and somehow made my own lips feel heavy with anticipation. She took a sip of her coffee and tilted her head as if considering me, really seeing me, in a way that left my chest tight. I shifted slightly on the sofa, not wanting to break the spell but aware that every second stretched longer than it should. I wanted to reach out, brush a stray strand of hair from her cheek, let her know without speaking how intensely I was drawn to her. But there was a quiet tension in the room, fragile and unspoken, as if any movement might shatter something delicate. Her laughter, soft and unrestrained, drifted across the room when my foot nudged hers. Again, unintentional, but she didn't retract her own. I realized she might have felt it too, that small spark, and it made me wonder how long I could sit here before it became impossible to pretend nothing was happening. Just as I opened my mouth to say something, anything, there was a knock at the front door. She flinched slightly, and in that instant, the spell broke. She glanced at me, her expression fleeting, unreadable, our eyes locked, holding a tension that neither words nor time could fully release. And then, with a breath that felt like it was stolen from me, she whispered, almost to herself, "I wasn't expecting anyone." The door creaked, footsteps approaching. My heart thudded in a way I couldn't control, caught between longing and the sudden, unbearable uncertainty of what might happen next. The door clicked shut behind her visitor, leaving the room wrapped in quiet again, but it was different now. Charged, almost electric. I couldn't stop noticing her, the way she moved around the kitchen, small, deliberate gestures that somehow carried more weight than they should. My eyes traced the curve of her neck as she reached for a mug, and I felt a ridiculous, fluttering awareness that I was staring. She caught me, not with words, not even a look of reproach, just the briefest raise of an eyebrow, a tilt of her head that made me want to melt in place. I quickly looked away, pretending to focus on my cold coffee, but it was impossible to ignore the warmth of her presence. I remembered the stories she had casually dropped over the months, her quiet divorce, the long years she'd spent raising her children, and the lingering ache of relationships that ended not with fireworks, but with gentle, painful dissolutions. There was a guardedness in her, a softness she rarely showed, and I found myself drawn to it like a moth to flame. "I don't usually get many visitors," she said, voice low, brushing her hair behind her ear. Her hand lingered on the counter, fingers brushing mine ever so slightly when she reached across. I felt it, tiny electric shocks from that fleeting contact, and I swore my pulse stuttered. "I figured it'd be nice," I said, fumbling with my words, aware that every syllable sounded clumsy, childlike even. She laughed softly, and it wasn't a mockery. It was gentle, inviting, and somehow deeply intimate. I caught glimpses of her vulnerability in these moments. The subtle sigh when she thought no one was watching, the way her eyes softened when she talked about the past. And I realized our attraction wasn't just about desire. It was about recognition, about the shared understanding of loneliness that no one else could see. She moved closer as I read aloud from the book on my lap, the curve of her shoulder brushing mine when she leaned to glance at the page. I felt her breath lightly against my ear and had to remind myself to breathe, to not betray the way my fingers twitched. I like this part, she murmured, not about the story, but something else entirely, and I caught the faint tremor in her voice. I nodded, pretending to follow the text, but my eyes kept straying to the soft line of her jaw, the way her collarbone caught the light. Then she paused, hand hovering near my shoulder, as if she wanted to touch but thought better of it. I didn't move, didn't speak. The tension hung between us, palpable, tangible, yet unclaimed. And somehow, that hesitation, the knowing we couldn't cross yet, made it feel closer, more urgent, more impossible to ignore. When her hand finally brushed mine, almost imperceptibly, I felt the world shrink to that single, shivering point of contact. We didn't say a word. We didn't need to. The air was thick, full of something neither of us could name yet, but both of us recognized. A fragile, forbidden connection that was dangerously, wonderfully real. And in that silence, I realized something. I didn't want it to end. Not now, not ever. The afternoon stretched lazily, the kind of stillness that makes every sound, the creak of floorboards, the faint hum of a refrigerator, feel louder, sharper. I was on the sofa, pretending to scroll through my phone, but I couldn't focus. She sat cross-legged on the armchair across from me, a book open in her lap that she wasn't reading. Not really. Her gaze kept finding me. I felt it before I could respond, a quiet weight settling across my chest. When our eyes met, the air seemed to pulse around us, a fragile, electric current we both tried to ignore. My hand itched to reach for hers, but I stayed still, pretending the cold plastic of my phone offered some invisible shield. Then my phone buzzed, her name lighting up the screen. I froze, caught in a rush of adrenaline and guilt. The message wasn't for her, yet somehow it felt like an intrusion, a spotlight on the delicate tension between us. I glanced up, heart hammering, and she was watching me, lips slightly parted, as if she'd read the unspoken panic on my face. I should get that, I muttered, but I didn't move. She leaned forward, shoulder brushing mine in the smallest, most dangerous touch, and I felt the heat of her body against mine. My fingers tightened around the phone without realizing it. "You can ignore it for now," she whispered, voice low, intimate, almost daring me. The word ignore hung between us, heavier than any sentence, load. Ed with the weight of everything we weren't supposed to feel. We sat like that, so close I could feel the rhythm of her breathing, the faint pulse at her wrist where her hand rested near mine. Every glance, every half-smile, every pause was a heartbeat we couldn't name, but could feel anyway. I caught a glimpse of her lips as she shifted slightly, and for a terrifying second, it seemed like the space between us had vanished entirely. I wanted to lean in, to bridge the last inch, but the thought of guilt, of what others would think, slammed into me like a sudden cold wind. My chest tightened, my stomach knotted, and I realized just how impossible this was, how thrilling and dangerous. She leaned closer too, her hand brushing against mine again, fingers grazing as if testing the boundary, daring me to cross it. My breath caught, and I swallowed, tasting the sudden sharpness of desire mixed with hesitation. The sound of the front door opening jolted us apart. Her smile quick, eyes darting to the hallway, hiding something we both understood. The world wasn't supposed to see us like this. I sat back, pretending to scroll through the phone, pretending nothing had happened, but the electricity lingered, clinging to my skin. When the house finally quieted again, she returned to the chair, inching closer under the pretense of reading. Her knee brushed mine, her fingers resting near mine on the book's spine. It was unspoken, but undeniable. We were pulled together, closer than ever, even as we both tried to resist. And in that quiet, dangerous space, I realized we didn't need words. The tension said everything. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon and coffee, but I hardly noticed. My eyes were locked on her, the small tremor in her hands, the way she kept tucking her hair behind her ear even though I knew she wanted me to reach out. I could feel the heat radiating from her, close enough to make my pulse skip, and every rational thought had evaporated somewhere between the last glance and this one. You're quiet again, she murmured, voice low, almost teasing, but there was an edge I hadn't heard before. Something fragile, sharp, waiting. I swallowed. My voice faltered. I wanted to say more, wanted to confess everything swirling in me, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I let my hand hover near hers on the counter, hesitant, trembling. Her eyes caught mine. That gentle, guarded vulnerability was gone, replaced with something raw, alive. She leaned just slightly, shoulder brushing mine. The contact was fleeting, accidental, or maybe not, but it was enough to make my stomach lurch. Her voice caught, and she paused, breathing soft against the nape of my neck as she moved just a hair closer. My head tilted toward her almost instinctively, my chest tightening. Every nerve screamed, and I needed, to close the last inch between us. You know we shouldn't, she whispered, almost inaudible. But the tension in her words only pulled me in harder. I caught the faintest scent of her perfume, warm and intoxicating, and felt the brush of her hair against my cheek as she leaned closer, eyes half closed. I can't stop thinking about you, I admitted, voice low, rougher than I intended. My hand brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, thumb lingering along her jaw. Her eyes widened for a heartbeat, and I felt the sudden, unbearable gravity of this moment. She shivered against me, or at the words, and I couldn't tell. Everything slowed. Her lips were so close I could see the moisture glinting in the light, the curve I'd imagined countless times. My chest ached, my fingers twitched toward her shoulder, toward her hand, toward anything that would let me bridge the final distance. I've wanted this, she confessed, voice trembling, breath hitching. There was fear in it, in the sharp intake of air, but also something like surrender. The world narrowed to the space between us. My heart thundered, my pulse in my throat. One step, one move, and it would be real. And then, the doorbell rang. We froze, our lips still inches apart, my hand just brushing hers, her hair tickling my cheek. The spell shattered instantly. She pulled back slightly, eyes wide, her chest rising and falling rapidly. I swallowed hard, heart pounding, caught between the electricity of what had almost happened and the sudden intrusion of reality. She stared at the door, then at me, a faint, knowing, frustrated smile tugging at her lips. I have to see who that is, she whispered, voice tight, barely above the hum of the house. And in that moment, everything changed. Everything that had been building. The closeness, the confession, the undeniable pull, hung suspended, like a breath held too long. I wanted to move, to claim the space we'd almost crossed, but I didn't. Not yet. Not now. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that made every sound. Our breathing, the faint hum of the refrigerator, impossibly loud. She stood near the kitchen counter, leaning just enough to brush against me when she moved. My chest tightened, pulse drumming in my ears, every nerve taut with the tension between us. You're staring again, she said, voice low, teasing, but not really. There was a raw edge in her tone, a tremor that betrayed something she didn't want to admit. I can't help it, I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. My hand twitched, hovering near hers on the counter, afraid to make contact yet desperate too. She shifted closer, the warmth of her shoulder brushing mine, her hair grazing my cheek. My breath hitched. The room seemed to shrink, the space between us charged and unyielding. Every glance, every hesitant movement, spoke louder than any words. I shouldn't be here, she murmured, voice trembling slightly. But the hesitation in her confession only pulled me nearer. My fingers brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, thumb lingering along the curve of her jaw. Her eyes widened, lips parting ever so slightly, and I felt it. Everything I'd been holding back crashing into sharp, uncontainable need. I can't stop thinking about you, I admitted, voice low, rough with tension. My hand twitched toward her shoulder, unsure, reckless. wanting to close the final distance. She shivered against me, or maybe at the words. It was impossible to tell. The scent of her, warm and subtle, filled my senses, and I wanted nothing more than to lean in and finally cross that line. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, eyes glistening, a fragile surrender mixed with fear. I've wanted this, she breathed, voice barely audible, a whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. Our lips hovered inches apart. I could see the faint shine of moisture on hers, the curve I'd imagined countless times, the quiver of anticipation. One step, one lean, and everything would be undone. The tension was unbearable, electric, suffocating. And then, the sudden jingle of the front door, sharp, intrusive, and real. We froze. Her shoulder slid back, hand retreating from mine, but the air between us still burned with what nearly happened. She glanced at the door, then back at me, eyes wide and restless, a mix of frustration and longing flickering in her gaze. I have to see who that is, she whispered, voice tight, almost choking on the words. In that suspended moment, the pull between us was still there, heavy and undeniable, teetering on the edge of a choice neither of us could yet make. Our lips were still inches apart, her hair brushing my cheek, my hand poised, as if one motion could change everything. And just like that, everything we had been holding back, the desire, the confession, the raw, fragile need, hung in the balance, waiting for a decision neither of us was ready to voice. The living room was dim, lit only by the fading gold of late afternoon sunlight filtering through the blinds. We were standing near the sofa, just inches apart. I could feel her warmth, the subtle rise and fall of her chest with each breath, the faint brush of her hair against my shoulder. My fingers itched to reach for her, but hesitation tangled with desire, each second stretching unbearably. I can't, she whispered, voice low, trembling, as if the words were already too heavy to carry. Yet she didn't step back. Her hand hovered near mine, fingers trembling, as if daring me to close the distance. I know, I said, my own voice rough, betraying everything I'd been holding in. I felt it too. Every single day. The air between us thickened, our eyes locked, and I saw it there. The raw, unguarded truth she usually hid beneath grace and poise. A flicker of fear, yes, but more than that, a need that mirrored mine. I could feel my chest pressing toward hers, the pull magnetic and impossible. Her lips parted slightly. I leaned closer instinctively, drawn to the warmth of her face, the soft curve of her cheek. My hand brushed a strand of hair from her eyes, thumb lingering against her skin. She didn't flinch. She leaned in too, just enough that our foreheads nearly touched. I can't lie anymore, she whispered, voice barely audible, almost lost in the quiet of the room. I've wanted this, wanted you. Something inside me broke then, all the careful restraint and hesitation dissolving in the heat of confession. I wanted her to know, to feel the same impossibly overwhelming pull I did. My hand moved, tentatively, toward hers, fingers brushing, curling around hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. We were closer than ever, breaths mingling, hearts hammering, and for a moment, the world fell away. The rules, the fear, everything except the raw, human need between us. There was nothing calculated, nothing perfect. Just this, a messy, trembling, undeniable connection that neither of us could, or wanted to, ignore. Her eyes searched mine, as if asking silently, "Is it worth it?" I nodded, a shaky, breathless motion, and the decision crystallized between us. We couldn't step back now. We wouldn't. "I don't care," I whispered, voice low, rough. "Not anymore." A faint smile tugged at her lips, her hand tightening in mine. And just like that, the tension that had bound us for months shifted. There was clarity in the chaos. We understood each other fully, not the convenient, polished version of people we pretended to be, but the real, flawed, aching versions standing in a quiet living room, inches apart, finally unafraid. The air between us pulsed with a new certainty, messy and raw, and I realized nothing could be the same after this. Nothing would ever need to be said aloud again. We had chosen. The evening had settled into a quiet, gentle hush. The sunlight had faded completely, leaving the living room bathed in the soft glow of the lamp by the sofa. We sat side by side now, knees almost touching, fingers brushing until they found each other naturally, without hesitation. She leaned against me, the weight of her shoulder grounding me in a way that made everything else, our doubts, the whispers of fear, the world outside, fade to nothing. I rested my hand over hers, thumb tracing small, lazy circles across the back of her hand, and I realized that the tension that had been coiling between us for weeks had finally unraveled into something tender, human, and impossibly real. "You're really here," she whispered, voice soft, almost shy. There was no pretense now, no guarded grace. Just her, the woman I had been quietly longing for, sitting beside me as if she belonged. "I am," I replied, voice low. "I'm not going anywhere." Her hand tightened around mine, a small, almost imperceptible motion, and I felt it in my chest like a spark. She tilted her head, and without thinking, I brushed my forehead against hers, slow and deliberate, a quiet, wordless promise passing between us. For the first time, the age gap didn't feel like a barrier. The past months of hesitation, stolen glances, and unspoken attraction had led to this, a messy, raw, undeniable intimacy that wasn't perfect, but it was ours. She sighed against me, a sound full of relief, warmth, and the slightest tremor of lingering vulnerability. "I was scared," she admitted quietly, "that it wouldn't be right." "I know," I said, pressing my hand a little firmer over hers. "But it feels right now. That's what matters." She smiled, small, soft, and entirely real, leaning further into me. Our legs brushed, our hands entwined, and for the first time, the nervous, jittery excitement of earlier weeks had settled into a calm, steady pulse, a shared heartbeat we didn't need to speak aloud. Minutes passed in this quiet closeness, neither of us needing more than the other's presence. Finally, she whispered my name, and I caught her gaze, holding it, memorizing the small expressions in her eyes, the confidence, the vulnerability, the undeniable humanity that made her who she was. We didn't rush, didn't force words, just let the simple act of being together speak volumes. A laugh, a sigh, a gentle squeeze of her hand. Everything felt like an affirmation of the journey we had taken. And in that soft, golden glow, I realized that we didn't need perfection. We had honesty, desire, and a choice to face the world together. I brushed a strand of hair from her face one last time, tucking it behind her ear with care. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against mine again, and in that quiet, lingering moment, I understood. We were home, together, and nothing else mattered. The tension had dissolved. The longing, the hesitation, the whispered what-ifs, all of it had found its place in the warmth of this shared embrace. Engagement questions for YouTube. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?